So in this video, we're going to be talking about the slow collapse of the Roman Empire, but only in its less important Western capital, Rome. So first of all, about the final exam. The final exam review sheet has been posted, and I've sent out emails about it telling you what to expect in terms of content and structure. Please make sure that you have prepared yourself for the content of the exam in terms of thinking about not merely facts, but facts as examples of evidence of how history is being interpreted, what you need to say about how things happen, why things happen, what the consequences of things are, the major turning points, what brings them about, and what follows from them. The task that we're undertaking here is to make sense of Roman history and to discuss what it is to be Roman and how that impacts upon the Romans themselves and the peoples that they encounter. And so explore all these things, take note of the deadlines, and come to me with any questions. So as we discussed last time, the Roman Empire has been divided in two, and even on those increasingly rare occasions when the same Augustus is in charge of both, the empire itself operates separately. In the East and the West, the Western Empire has become its own entity. Politically, militarily, economically, socially, culturally, this has been developing for centuries. Now it is official and formal, from Diocletian on, but that, in a sense, Diocletian's division of the empire is acknowledgement of and dealing with what had already become a separation, a meaningful separation between the culture and economy of the West and the culture and the economy of the East, both of which are very different from each other. And as we've discussed, the economy of the East is much stronger. This is where the resources and the skilled labor and the great cities are. This is where the trading routes are most lucrative, and this is where the connections are to non-Roman, non-Mediterranean peoples to the east and south. And so the East has a much stronger economic base. It also has a much stronger cultural base, and this is a matter of perception as much as anything else. But the Western Empire, the Romans have always thought of the peoples of the East as having these older, deeper cultures that they've had to react to and demonstrate their superiority to, and so this is this sort of self-perception problem the Romans have had from the very beginning, from the time of kings, surrounded by Etruscans to the north and Greeks to the south and Phoenicians to the west. All of this is deeply embedded in the psyche of the people of Rome, and this has not gone away. And so the Western Empire has perceived itself as being secondary to the East in terms of culture, and this is one of the motivations for the Roman Empire sort of embracing and absorbing the Hellenistic East in order to sort of make up for that deficiency and merge to create the ultimate culture that brings together the advantages of Roman culture, its strength, its virtue, its military capability, its ruthlessness, with the accomplishments of Hellenistic culture in philosophy, science, engineering, technology, and all these things to create the ultimate society. Now these things have been divided. And the Western Empire is left with its sense of secondariness, along with its weaker economy, and this brings about a lot of what's the stages of degradation that the Western Empire undergoes that the Eastern Empire does not. And we see this in primary sources from the time. And so we have this from multiple perspectives. We have texts like this one, "The Luxury of the Rich in Rome," that talk about how the Rome has become this ghost to a place that is a shadow of its former glory, that is full of buildings that are falling down and people that are falling down, and the wealthy maintain their luxury, in a sort of siege mentality, and this is a place full of disease and vanity, and as a result is sort of tragic to call it Rome. And on the other hand, we have other sources like this that celebrate Rome even in this time, even after it has been sacked by Alaric, which is when this poem is being written. It's talking about the greatness of Rome despite its current condition. In other words, it's talking about the idea of Rome and how it is still palpable even amidst this current situation. And this is a recurring theme that goes into the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages, there are a lot of periods where even when Rome is occupied by the papacy and the Catholic Church, there are very few other people there, and the city of Rome is a place of ruins and of lost of history, and there are travelers' tales of people that go to Rome in the Middle Ages and observed with a sort of awe, what can be perceived of what Rome had once been and what it now no longer is. That's perceptible, all the way back here in the 400s, when Rome is still part of the Western Roman Empire. Part of the problem here, and the part of the reason that the West is impacted particularly, that it undergoes a rapid degradation after the strength of the 4th century, the 5th century, the Western Empire is falling apart. And partly this is because there is a rapid succession of massive movements of Indo-European nations. Once again, this is impacting on Roman history. Roman history starts with this. Roman history is the result of the movement of Indo-European nations who come down into Italy at the beginning of the Iron Age and settle in Italy, around the Etruscans, and become, the Latins and the Oscans and the Samnites and all of the Italic peoples. And again, we had the impact at the climax of the Roman Republic, when the Cimbri and the Teutones, massive Indo-European nations, are rampaging through Europe on the way to Italy, and the Roman Republic fails to stop them. Most notably at the Battle of Arausia in 105, and as a result, Gaius Marius is able to turn the tide for the Populares and bring about an advantage in the civil wars that ultimately leads to the rise of Julius Caesar and the collapse of the Republic and the beginning of the Principate. So already we've seen massive impact of Indo-European nations on Roman history, and now we have the culmination of this. Part of what's going on is that there are multiple nations on the move, and the peoples that are coming in the huge numbers from the east are forcing the peoples that are already here, closer to Roman territory to go on the move, to get out of their way, and so we see the movements of the Western Goths, the Visigoths, who are in Southeast Europe, are forced to migrate west out of the way and end up in Spain. The Ostrogoths end up in South Central Europe and Italy. The Franks are Germanic people that move into northern Gaul and displace the Celts who are now there. So in terms of Gallic history, French history, what would eventually become French history, you want to bear in mind that that Gaul, the original territory of what is now France, was made up of who the people the Romans called Gauls, who are Celtic peoples, and these underwent a sort of forced integration with this new wave, another wave of Indo-Europeans. The Celts were Indo-Europeans. The Franks were a later wave of Indo-Europeans that spoke a Germanic language different from the Celts, and so this is one of the reasons why France was such a diverse and divided place in the Middle Ages and still is today. As many of us know from other histories, the Angles and the Saxons, another Germanic set of tribes, moved out of northern Europe and into Great Britain. The Vandals, who famously derived a negative reputation for their destructiveness, but this is from the standpoint of Romans who were terrified of the barbarians. The Vandals weren't any worse than any of these other peoples who are simply moving into territories under pressure from other nations behind them and taking land and trying to survive. And some of this is done very peacefully in a way that attempts to mitigate the amount of land that's taken from other people. A lot of these lands were depopulated by the plagues of the 3rd century, and so some of this is just the massive movement of peoples coming in. The Roman Empire in the West doesn't have the resources to resist these, and this is partly because of the weakness of the Western Roman treasury, and partly because this has meant for some time that the legions in the West have been having a great deal of difficulty defending these frontiers. And have been spread out more and more, and so there's been a shortfall in the ability to keep legions in the field, a shortfall in the effectiveness of the legions that are already there defending this long territory, and as a result, Rome enters into alliances with Gallic and Germanic tribes that are willing to share the resistance to outside tribes coming in. In other words, the tribes that Rome is allying with are interested in defending their own territory, and so they're willing to work with the Romans. This isn't always successful, partly because these alliances don't always work out, and these Gallic and Germanic tribes, bear resentments against the Romans for the Romans keeping their standard of living within amongst the Romans, that barrier of us versus them that we talked about when we discussed Hadrian. And so, there are, these alliances sometimes lead to betrayals, sometimes lead to the Germanic tribes being given responsibility to hold territory that they're not in a position to hold, and they're forced back. The result is these federati, these alliances, these military alliances with the Germanic and Gallic tribes are part of the problem, and make the frontiers of the Western Roman Empire more vulnerable. The Eastern Empire is less susceptible, partly because these tribes are not moving in the direction of the East, where there's less land, less fertile land. Anatolia is full of deserts and mountains, and that's where the direction that you would need to go. Or if you went around the Black Sea, you'd have to go through the Caucasus Mountains, which are very difficult to pass. And so it's very difficult to go in the direction of the Eastern Mediterranean. And so the Eastern Empire is much better in a position to defend the Danube and its own much narrower frontiers. And so as a result, the Eastern Empire is safe. It's in a position to bribe barbarian commanders to go in a different direction. It's in a position to fight when it needs to, and it doesn't become a priority of the Eastern Empire to fight for Italy until after Italy has already succumbed. And this becomes a important element of Byzantine history. But at this point, the East and Western empires are operating on their own prerogatives, and the whole point of dividing them is that they would manage their own concerns. And so the Romans and the history that we have tends to look at the Visigoths and the other Germans that become so invested in what had been Roman territory as these slavering, blood drenched, disgusting barbarians. In point of fact, most of these people had been in contact with the Roman world, Roman customs. Most of these people had become conditioned to the way that Romans fight in order to be able to fight with them. Some of them because they had been taught by or had part of their forces were these former Roman allies that the Romans had engaged with to defend their frontiers. These Visigoths fought in a civilized way and sought to be seen as peers of the Romans. In other words, they are looking to demonstrate that they are just as worthy of, uh, of, of, of culture and of the advantages of the Roman world as the Roman people in the Roman provinces, more so because they're young people, strong and vibrant, and the Roman peoples are in a state of decay and degradation. These are the Germanic peoples are seeing themselves as the Romans of the future, and are aware of their history, are aware of the Roman story and of their own story, and they see their origins that they're acting out as being very similar to Roman origins 1,000 years before. Um, and so this is varying from story to story, and from leader to leader and from tribe to tribe. But the Roman perspective on this, and when I say Roman, I see both Eastern and Western, is in terms of these people are outsiders who are taking Roman land, and these people are not subscribing to Orthodox Christianity, and so this makes them inferior humans. This makes them barbarians, and the sack of Rome is talked about as a demonstration of this lack of humanity, these animals that come into this great city of Rome, and sit about on the Roman on the Roman throne, and act as if they are as good as their superiors. And the Romans of this time are not in a position to stand up to them. There's very little in the way of heroic stories on the Roman side. There's mostly stories about the terribleness of these invaders. Alaric's Sack of Rome is a very famous moment because it is the one thing that the Romans had vowed would never happen. There are a number of incursions into central Italy and threats to Rome itself, but Alaric's sack in particular stands out as, okay, this is the beginning of the end. The text of this is great because there's so little valorization of the actual Western Roman Emperor. The anecdote about the rooster named Roma who dies on that day, blah blah blah. It's comical almost the way in which Rome is un-Roman in its ability to fend off this relatively mundane threat from a barbarian leader like Alaric, who should was in a position to make Rome permanently a Germanic capital had he chosen the correct person to hold that territory. But in fact, he chose an idiot, and the Romans were able to retake this territory. Although, for various reasons, the Roman emperor is often not in Rome anymore. You'll notice in the other reading there is talk about disease and so forth, and Rome being a problematic place to actually live in. And so, in these last stages in the 5th century, the Western Roman emperor is often in the city of Ravenna instead of Rome itself. So what happens instead is that the Western Roman emperors reassert their authority, but it is all it is fake. It is the authority of the Roman emperors in the West is now at the mercy of these Germanic rulers who have come to dominate Italy and have the military strength and have control of the agricultural resources of Italy and Europe collectively. And the actual Roman emperors in the West have nothing. And so they are forced to pay tribute to the Germanic kings and forced to enact policy, in tune with what the Germanic tribes want. This is what is called the shadow emperors, and so we have Roman emperors during this time who are issuing decrees and commissioning coins like we see here, and blah blah blah, all the way up through somebody who with the grandiose name of Romulus Augustulus, who is the last of the official Roman emperors. But in this last stage, in the late 5th century, these Roman emperors are puppets of the Germanic kings. So the actual fall of Rome is meaningless in this sense. The Western Empire is no longer an independent entity for some time, for decades before the title is actually done away with. There's one last moment of hope and glory, which is the Battle of Chalôns. The Battle of Chalôns essentially involves the remaining Roman forces in the West teaming up with Gauls and Germans against the Huns. And Attila the Hun, this drawing here is famous modern drawing of Attila the Hun, who is a threat to everybody, who is even more hated, even more feared, because he and the Huns are absolutely destructive. They are a menace who terrorizes these lands with the sole purpose of destruction and massacre, for the purpose of eliminating all potential enemies of the Huns. And so, in these last great moments, Attila the Hun is resisted by the combined will and military might of the Romans and Gauls and Germans, and then the Goths, and they are the Huns are turned back, not all the way. They're not sent all the way back to Asia. For a time, they're able to create a little kingdom of their own in Eastern Europe until finally they are broken apart and divided after Attila's death. The Eastern Empire contributes to this by once again bribing Attila to go away. But the point is that that there's this moment here where it seems like something is possible if the Romans had sort of merged with the Germanic and Gallic allies that they were closest with. What might have resulted was a new kind of Western Roman Empire that was able to persevere over the tribulations to come. What would have been perhaps a final adaptation, but this is not what occurs. What occurs instead is the adaptation of the focus of everything cultural and economic in the West. being set aside, and in the East becoming the future of Rome. And so we have this final moment of Odoacer coming to Rome and claiming it on behalf of his own people, and setting himself up as king of Italy, but also as the titular Roman emperor. And Theodoric, the Roman emperor in the East, recognizes Odoacer as being a successor to the 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 Roman emperors in the West. In other words, there is supposed to be a continuity here. From a certain perspective, you can talk about how, well, instead of these people who call themselves Roman emperors but who are actually puppets of the Germanic kings, what we have instead is the Germanic kings coming out of the shadows and saying, okay, well, we're running things in Italy, we're in charge of the Western Roman Empire, and so we are the successors of that. And from that standpoint, Odoacer is talked about in terms of his respect for the legacy of the Romans and his willingness, his motivation to ensure that Germanic rule over Italy and over Western Europe remains as civilized as the Romans could have made it. That lives up to the Roman legacy as much as possible, and with a potential of some kind of partnership and working relationship with the Roman Empire in the East. And so what we have here is Germanic Empire develops in the West that is controlled by the Ostrogoths, Odoacer and his successors, covering Italy and parts of Southeast Europe. We had the Visigoths in Spain and southern Gaul. We had the Franks in northern Gaul, the Burgundy, the Anglo-Saxons, and so forth, the Vandals in Roman northern Africa. And to the east, we have the Eastern Roman Empire, which continues to exist as before. So Southeast Europe, Anatolia, Assyria, uh, Palestine, Egypt, Libya, all of that had been the dioceses of the Eastern Empire are now the Roman Empire, and in a sense, this now allows the Eastern Empire to consolidate its strengths and its identity, and it is now that they start to talk about winning back Italy for the Romans. And remember, they are the Romans. The Byzantine emperors are their primary the characteristic is to be successors of Constantine, which is to say, successors of the idea of Rome as embodied by Constantine and the idea of Christianity as embodied by the actions of Constantine in ensuring the role of the Roman emperor in being a focal point for Christian identification, and for Constantinople to be a focal point for Christian identification. So the Byzantine emperors become obsessed with Constantinople being the center of the world. All of humanity should be Christian so that they can be saved. Anyone who is not Christian, including the Jews, but also everyone else who is pagan, and all the heretics who are Arian or whatever, all of those people are going to hell, and so need to be saved. They need to be brought to the light, and the center of the light is Constantinople, and the focal point of that is the Byzantine emperor. And so this becomes the abiding story of Byzantine history, which takes on an even more urgent and frantic aspect with the rise of Islam in the 7th century. Constantinople is this is the city that embodies everything that the Roman Empire is now about, which is the protection of everything that the Romans and the Greeks had achieved in terms of virtue, in terms of military ability, in terms of philosophy and technology and science. Everything that the Roman Empire had achieved, most of all, the achievement of salvation on behalf of all mankind through the imposition of universal Christianity and of being this beacon for all the world. So Constantinople is the most important city. More important than Jerusalem, more important than Rome, and from the standpoint of the Romans, this continues to be the case after the Byzantine Empire endures for another 1,000 years, as I've said many times, all the way up to 1453, and the in the last moments, all the way down at the end of that story, what mattered most to everybody is that Constantinople must be preserved as a focal point, a symbol, a bastion of the Roman Empire, and most of all of the idea of universal Christianity. What is really truly striking about the legacy of the Roman Empire is that there are three different successor cultures to Romanitas. On the one hand, we have what medieval historians call Western Christendom, which is the collection of various nations and empires that arise in Italy, Gaul, Germany, Spain, that reflect the Christianity as it existed in the West, increasingly under the dominion of the Patriarch of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. And this is a key component of medieval history. Also, we have the Byzantine Empire, which is a separate field of medieval study. This is the Roman Empire. It's worth mentioning once again that the Romans don't call themselves Byzantines. Historians use the word Byzantine to refer to the Roman Empire during the Middle Ages, to distinguish it from the Roman Empire of the ancient era. And it's simply a matter of historiographical nomenclature, deriving from the fact that the original site of Constantinople was previously a Greek colony of very little import called Byzantion. But the Romans, headquartered in Constantinople, call it the Roman Empire. And the Islamic caliphates that are the result of the Islamic Revolution are a successor to this, successor to Rome as well, because they consume all of the territory that the Eastern Empire had previously held, and so the peoples that are subject to the Islamic Caliphate and the cultures that make up the Islamic Caliphate are Roman Hellenistic cultures in Mesopotamia, in Palestine, in Egypt, and so forth. And so the result of this is that Islam absorbs a great deal of the Roman legacy. And in fact, Islam is notable for preserving a lot of Hellenistic philosophy that did not fit well with Christianity, and so was not well preserved in the Byzantine Empire or in Western Christendom. Most notably, the works of Plato and some of the works of Aristotle were preserved amongst the Muslims who a number of the very famous centers of learning from the Eastern Roman world, including Antioch and Jerusalem and Alexandria, remain, vital places of scholarship and study of all kinds of cultures, not just of Muslim nature, but of pagan and Christian nature as well. So my point is that all the Mediterranean world, even though it breaks apart into these very different pieces, is the product of the Roman Empire and is infused with elements of Roman culture, society, law, and so forth. So, as you look back on the story of the Romans as we've been navigating it throughout this semester, there are a number of things that you want to talk about, there are a number of things that you want to think about. And so, we started this story out with why Rome? Why is Rome the city that becomes this dominating force? Rome is in the middle of nowhere and is one of hundreds of similar villages. It's not even one village at its origin. And yet, this nondescript, out of the bay, backwater, rustic village at the edge of nowhere becomes the dominant force of the entire Mediterranean and shapes its entire future down to the present day. Why Rome? Why is it that this city is the one that ends up accomplishing all of this? What are the factors that make that possible? Why Carthage? Why Hannibal? Why is Carthage Rome's greatest enemy? Why is Hannibal the greatest enemy general that the Romans ever faced? What is it that makes the Republic fall? Why does the Republic endure for 500 years and then come to this spectacular, catastrophic end? What is it that makes the Western Empire fall that we talk about? That happens another 500 years later. What is it that causes the Eastern Empire not to fall? One of the things that I mentioned before when I was talking about the nature of the Roman Empire, leading into the 3rd century crisis, is that historians have often remarked that, it's not surprising that the Roman Empire fell in the West. It's surprising that the Roman Empire held together in the first place. And so this becomes an even more interesting question when you look at the fact that the Eastern Empire continues to endure against ongoing threats. Did Christianity save the empire or destroy it? So, in other words, is the Roman Empire something that still continues to exist once it becomes the Christian Roman Empire, or has it become something else? Has it been replaced by something else? And this is a question in the West as well as in the East. What is the Roman idea? What does it mean if you are a Roman, if you are a Roman man standing there in the Forum Romanum, and you are thinking about what it means to be a part of this culture? What is it that you identify with? What is it that binds you to the idea of Rome, that binds you to the city of Rome? What is it that you have in common with other men and women who call themselves Roman? What does it mean to be Roman? How much does this change? How much is this idea of what it means to be a Roman something that is shared by Cincinnatus and Julius Caesar and Marcus Aurelius and Romulus Augustulus? What does it mean to be Roman? And does that carry on to how much of that is still present in Justinian and the Eastern emperors to come? What is Rome's legacy for us? And all these events are washing over us, shaping the lives that we live, the expectations of a citizen, and the nature of the relationship between an individual and the family and the community. How much of that comes from Rome? How much of that comes from our legacy as successors to the Roman Empire? One of the readings we had is Scipio's Dream, in which he talks about the intrinsic nature of Romanness, the idea of virtue, the idea of action, the idea of being able to defend your community ahead of your own ambition, and how the perspective of that is in a much larger universe in which to one extent, Rome is physically insignificant, and yet, the concept embodied here, what it is that it means to devote yourself to Romanitas, is all important because of that. And we see that in elements of Roman architecture that exist today, such as this is the Roman Pantheon, which is still exists in Rome today. The domed ceiling above gives you a sense of the vastness of the world, the complexities of the heavens in times of pagan worship, and how it all is a part of a single idea. You can come to your own conclusions about what you would feel as a Roman standing under this dome, or walking through the Forum, or looking out over over the degradation of the city of Rome as it's sacked by Alaric, or looking back upon the past of men like Fabius and Canatus, and how the world has changed. You can come to your own conclusions about that, but they're all part of a long and vibrant story. And that's the end of our exploration of it. Thanks for all your involvement and interaction and enthusiasm this semester. And we'll talk again soon. For now, that's that.